Welcome to From the Pit number 5. I'm Larry Blank, and today I'm going to be speaking to my dear friend, West End music director, arranger, composer, conductor, Gareth Valentine. And Gareth's most important quality is he's a tremendous football fan. But we're not going to talk about that at all because I don't know anything about British football except that they play it. But
Yeah,
Gareth, welcome.
thank you very much, Larry. And yeah, I mean, I have a canard already, which is that the Americans call football soccer, I believe, don't they? Which
That's
over
right.
here, that terminology is anathema. It's
Well,
not soccer; it's got to be football.
when we say football, we think about these very big, overweight guys, with padding on,
Yeah,
trying to kill each other on the field.
yeah, yeah,
And when you think of football, you think about these guys in t-shirts and shorts kicking the ball around. So it's
yeah.
very
That's
different.
it. That's it.
Yes. so, so I played soccer as a kid though in summer camp, so we know what soccer is. We just didn't call it football.
There you go. Good, good. Well, I'm glad
But
we got that right.
we get that out of the way. Now we can talk about important stuff like show business.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what I want to point out to our listeners, uh, you're in my mind the top guy in the West End. You're the best, and you know what I think of you. But what I want to talk about is number one, how you got started, and your beginnings, and then I want to talk a little bit about not only music directing in the West End, but you're a tremendous dance arranger and arranger, period. And that's how we've worked together so much. So please tell us a little bit about your humble beginnings.
Well, they were humble. I mean, it was a working class family. Dad was a bricklayer, mum was a school cleaner. And in those days, access to music, particularly in North Wales, which was a cultural desert, was very difficult. But through the Welsh tradition of the Eisteddfod, now the Eisteddfod is a thing which is particular to Wales. It is a festival of music and of dance, and it takes place from school level to international level. And it was through the Eisteddfod that I was able to sing in choirs and to sing solo. In fact, I competed in the International Eisteddfod as a boy soprano and came second. I was beaten by an Inuit girl. Um, and from there, I knew that all the way through school, I was fascinated by what my piano professor at college called music and grease paint. I knew it would go in that way, and more than anything, I was going to be an opera singer, and nothing was going to stop me. But life, of course, takes us in different directions. We're leaves in the wind, aren't we? And I went to the Royal College of Music, studied classical music, both vocal and piano. And when I finished that, I became a repetiteur in the Royal College of Music Opera School. So I was learning that repertoire. And then, because my parents thought music would be a precarious occupation, wouldn't it be good if I did a teaching diploma, which I did at the Institute of Education? I then taught for a while in what we call here secondary education. I think you call it high school. Um, and so, you see, I really didn't know where I was going, and I didn't come into the business until quite late through a very established musical supervisor who was Andrew Lloyd Webber's man, called Anthony Bowles. And through a series of circumstances I won't bore you with now, I got to meet Anthony, and Anthony took me under his wing. We became great friends, and I learned so much from this man. He was what they now call old school. I guess I'm old school now. But there was nothing he didn't know, and he was very nurturing and also very funny. He was so it reminds me of you in many ways.
Well, we're both very lucky in that we had strong mentoring from old school uh, people like that. And I
Mm.
wanted to point out, and this is something I don't think you're consciously aware of, but I am having now, worked so much in the UK and in Europe as well as the US. I find Europe much more nurturing about music, and in communities, even in the industrial community that you grew up in Wales, music was emphasized, and you could sing in the choir, and it was a good thing to do, whether you did it in church or just a community thing. The same thing with, as you know, with brass bands. The quality of brass playing in all of the UK always astounds me, because you can play the smallest little town, and all of a sudden you have this great brass section. And the singing is always, I always get a great joy, especially when guys like you and Jay Alexander are handling the choir, because you have so much background in it. It's really impressive, and I enjoy that part. But we don't have that in the U.S. I mean, we have music in schools, and there are great music schools, but it's not part of the community. It used to be, but things have changed. For instance, when I was in middle school and junior high school, they had school orchestras, but they barely exist anymore.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I remember being belonging to the Kevin Maur Opera Society, and they used to do all the Gilbert and Sullivan stuff, and I used to wade through all those scores. And Sullivan, if you look at that stuff and you look at what else was being written at that time by Stainer and Stafford and Parry and all those kind of dusty old Victorian, rather stodgy, homogenous composers, Sullivan was like a diamond. He was producing this light, beautiful, very characteristic music that when you hear it immediately, it's unique. He has his own voice in the same way that Offenbach did. And his woodwind writing particularly is wonderful. And I think that was probably because his father was an Irish military man who he part of the Irish Fusiliers before they came over to Britain. And in order to, as it were, stymie the Irish stigma, they got rid of the O'Sullivan. So he was Arthur Sullivan. In those days, to be Irish was considered not very, not very
Mm-hmm.
polite. Um, yeah.
That's very interesting. But I know you're kind of expert in the Gilbert O'Sullivan catalog. I had to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, I I didn't know that. Um, but but what interests me is what drew you to the music and the grease paint. What got? I mean, when I was growing up, my parents had the Music to South Pacific on the piano, because show music was the popular music in the States at that time. So, and the radio, and they were playing show tunes all the time. What was the case like in Wales?
Well, I think it was because of the local amateur operatic society, and I used to go as a kid, from the age of 8 right up to when I left to college at 18, and sometimes took part in those things. I mean, the amateur um, world here in the UK is enormous. I mean, almost every small town, every village has its play or operatic society. And in fact, I know that there's a very, very good society in New York, the Gilbert and Sullivan Society of New York, who put on absolutely first-rate performances with the full orchestras and the whole thing. And they're very impressive. Um, so anyway, I think that's the thing, coupled with the Eisteddfod tradition, the choral tradition, which anyway I mean, is widespread all over the UK and Northern Ireland. Um, it's funny because that tradition has disappeared in France altogether. Sure, they have choral societies and things, but nothing like the standard we have here. And I'm
Well, that's
curious
what
to
I
know
mean.
why. You know.
Well, it's very strange, because, as he said, in the States, we also had a lot of amateur dramatic society, uh, but I know about the Amdrams in the UK, and there's a lot of stuff going on in pantos, which uh, to Americans, when they hear pantos, they go, "Oh my God, that sounds like children's theater," and I didn't realize until I actually experienced the pantos in the UK that it's highly professional theater, and it's basically uh, winter stock.
Yeah.
while
Yeah.
we had summer stock, you had winter stock, and you're doing, you might do Puss in Boots, but it's just the story, and then they insert songs from wherever they wanted to insert songs from, and get big names to do it, and pay big money to big celebrities to perform in it. And I know that was a big starting ground for a lot of people. Did you do a lot of pantos?
I did one with Anthony Bowles, which was called Dick Whittington and his amazing Technicolor dream coat, and uh, it was in a little theatre up in North Wales, and then latterly I got a commission from the Old Vic Theatre, of which Kevin Spacey was the then artistic director. And he said, "Look, we want to do apparently we want to do Aladdin. We want Ian McKellen to play the Dane, which is something he's never done, and we want somebody to write an original score." Now, there's an opportunity I couldn't pass. So I wrote all the songs and dance and incidental music for this pantomime, and it was so successful they repeated it the following year. Ian just loved getting in a dress and loved being Marlene Dietrich and loved being all those ladies. And it was really, it was such fun. Um,
That's great. Um, just to sidetrack, I have so much to talk to you about that. I just wanted to quiz you a little bit about pantos, but what was the first musical that you got involved in the West End, and what was your position?
in the West End, um, it will have been 42nd Street.
Right.
And I was the assistant musical director. Now, this is the original production that came over. In fact, David Merrick was still around. He was very much around the rehearsals. Helen Montague was the producer. Kevin Amos was the musical supervisor. And because Gower Champion had died, Karen Baker and Randy Skinner were commissioned to put the thing on its feet there. It's where I met Catherine Zeta-Jones, who was one of the ensemble. And then she
Right.
came through the ranks as soon as she became Peggy Sawyer. And then within, a year or two, she was on the side of double-decker buses, being advertised as part of Zorro, the movie, with Anthony Banderas. I mean, her career just went up. It never went across. It just went straight up. Um, it's where I met Stephen Mear, of course, who's one of our top choreographers and with whom I have had a long working association. Um, so that's where that was my very first job, and I was learning. I was very young.
Uh-huh.
I must tell you how I got that job because it actually slots in very nicely with what we're about to talk about, the dance arranging thing, and it just shows the naivety of myself, but it also shows the way things were then. I mean, then, what am I talking about? The early 80s, 83 this will have been. Um, and I was asked to be the assistant musical director on a Gershwin show called OK, which had been uh, rewritten by Ned Sherrin and Carol Brahms. The estate had given permission for the script to be updated. Ian Judge was the director, and they said they wanted me to be the overture, by which they meant I would come on stage at a white grand piano in a white-tailed suit on a stage which looked like a piano keyboard, and I would play and sing the overture. Um, and part of that remit was to stand up on top of the grand piano and to do a tap dance with Myra Sands, who wore a pink tutu. Now, if that isn't, an introduction by fire, I don't know what is. 'Cause that was
That's
one of
that.
my first jobs. but,
Uh, it's so
but
funny because there was so many uh, attempts at reviving OK, and I didn't know about that one.
oh yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Ian McPherson did the orchestrations, and Lindsay Dolan was the choreographer. Now, this is my naivety because I will be what 24, 25. Didn't know nothing about nothing. And I was so just playing the piano for rehearsals. And at one point, The choreographers looked at me and he said, "Now, we're going to need some dance music here. Needs to be about 6 minutes." I'd never done anything like this in my life. So I thought, oh. He said, so I need something that goes like this. I need 8 bars of swing. I need to get the girls down. I need the boys to start singing here. And then I wanted to do a waltz. And then so I thought, oh, Christ, what is this? Completely unprepared. Um, so I said, well, I need some manuscript paper. Don't forget, no computers in those days.
Right.
So someone from stage management had to go down to the only music shop in Chichester to get manuscript. It sounds silly now, to get manuscript paper and pencils and rubbers. Um, and I wrote this, what will have been my first dance arrangement with not having had any chops. And this was completely unexpected. And doing this stuff cold, which in turn was orchestrated by Ian McPherson. And this went on for the whole 6 weeks. I wrote so much music for this thing. And of course, now these days, that would be A, you'd expect a credit, B, you'd expect some money and a contract to do such a thing. But
Hmm.
it never even occurred to me. Why would it?
Just just
I
part of the
just come off
gig. Yeah.
yeah, I just come off the bus.
Hmm.
Anyway, I did it all, and there was talk of it coming into town. It never did. But anyway, I was just very glad to be doing anything like that at all in those days.
You just made me think of a story which I'm sure you heard from John Kander when John Kander was the dance arranger on Irma la Douce, and I believe uh, Peter Brook was the director, and they had a ballet called the Freedom of the Seas, the
Yeah.
Arctic Ballet. And Peter Brook turned to John Kander and said, "John, a little penguin music, please."
I must tell you another little anecdote about John because an animal anecdote because I had the good fortune to be invited to John's home up in the Catskill Mountains for a long weekend, and we were driving from New York to this house, and he told me the story about when he and his husband Albert were looking for a place to live in that vicinity, and it was late at night, and they had the headlights on. And all of a sudden, John said to Albert, "There's a guy just walked across the road in a bear costume." And Albert said, "John, that was a real bear." And John said, "At that moment, I realized I'd been in show business for far too long."
That's very
Yeah,
funny.
yeah,
That's great. Well, you see, you all of you dance arrangers have a great sense of humor, and there's
yeah,
that grease paint thing. But
yeah.
that's very interesting about your start as a dance arranger. You just did it because that was what they asked you
Yeah,
to do.
yeah. I mean, I didn't. I mean, if I have no idea what happened to that music, but if I looked at it now, I'd probably blanch. I mean, it
No,
was just the best I could do. I was just, writing bars and bars of stuff, and I can't even remember. Did I do chord symbols? I remember? Such a
well,
long time
the
ago.
the thing is, you did it, and of course, what happened later on. There were many productions done revivals like 42nd Street and shows like that come into the West End from New York and other places like that from Broadway.
Mm.
But there are also so many productions now, especially in the UK, done at the Chocolate Factory and uh, in Leicester and Southwark and uh, especially Chichester, where they do new productions and they want new choreography, new directions, new dance music. And you've kind of made yourself the king of that, which is great because, as we discussed, if you come in just as a conductor, uh, you get paid as a conductor.
That's
If
right.
you come
Yeah.
in writing arrangements and dance music, there's justification to make more money, which is
Well,
a
there
very
is. Yeah.
good thing. And of course, that creates work for orchestrators as well, which is why there are so many new orchestrations on so many shows that you never even knew needed new orchestrations.
Absolutely. And added to which, it's really lovely to be able to, as I say, contribute to the fabric of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Because I often say this, they say that, although we're called the creative team, if you're going to look at it absolutely by the book, creative means that where there was nothing, now there's something that hitherto had not existed. It's a new thing. And that can be said by the authors, by which I mean the composer, the lyricist, the book writer, the choreographer, the lighting designer, you could say, the designer, the costume designer. They can say, you see that set? That belongs to me. That's mine. I did that. See those costumes? Hear that song? Hear those lyrics? That's mine. A musical director can't do that because MDs are we're interpretive people, aren't we? It's an interpretive art. It's not. We don't make anything, and therefore to be able to write dance arrangements, vocal arrangements, or even arrangements of songs and so on and so on. It's one of my favorite things because now you're in a creative vent, you know, and
Well,
it's
it's
very
exactly
rewarding.
it's the same thing that happened to me because we both started very young, and I was conducting a whole bunch of shows when I was in my 20s, and I got I hate to say this, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but I got bored just being the conductor because it's recreative. It's not creative at all.
Yeah,
And even though every night I was facing a large orchestra in the old days when we always had somewhere between 20 and 30 musicians in a Broadway pit, it was a pleasure to walk in and conduct it. But it was the same thing every night, and I
yeah.
hadn't necessarily created it.
Mm.
And when I started doing new shows, as you did, uh, I might have created the vocal arrangements and the routines of the numbers. And there was also an orchestrator. But then later on, I became more interested in orchestrating, basically for the very reasons you're talking about. I felt like I was contributing to the
Yeah,
final
yeah,
fabric of it, and
yes.
that was more fun. So tell me, what were some of the other shows that I know you did tons of shows, some
Mm.
slipped by and never heard from again.
Yeah.
But what were the ones that stuck with you where you really felt that you had contributed in a positive way and some of the
Are you
musicals
talking about as an arranger or conductor? Um,
as an arranger?
yeah. Well, I suppose the first big one will have been Anything Goes because Trevor
Uh-huh.
Nunn, with whom I already had an association through The Baker's Wife, had invited me and Stephen Mear to be the choreographer and MD of the show at the National Theatre. And now the National Theatre, when they rehearse these things, at least then, we had 10 weeks rehearsal and then something like, 10, like a week of text and then more previews than you could shake a stick at. So, and I'm not sure that's a good thing, but Stephen and I were able to take our time over putting together these big numbers,
Am I
particular. I
correct
mean,
though that it was subsidized theater in the UK
subsidized
for
theatre. You don't have
right?
that there. And I know that Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince and Stephen Schwartz, all these people, for years and years, have been lobbying to get something like that in the United States. And they said it's never going to happen because of the way everything is structured there. It's just going to happen. You think about it, a national theatre, with four auditoria, especially to produce and to workshop new work. And anybody who's worked at the National Theatre will tell you it's a village. It's actually like a little town. I mean, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
wonderful thing.
Well,
And so, yeah.
well, the thing is, I have to say, some years ago, it's more than 20 years ago, I was brought in to help with Mac and Mabel. That was done uh, at the Piccadilly with Caroline O'Connor, and I was brought in by Jerry Herman to do some new orchestrations, and there was a lot of new dance music. And most of the stuff that I did is now interpolated into the books that are hired out
Mm,
as if it were the original. Uh,
yeah.
because Jerry made some improvements he wanted to make, and that's a very positive feeling to me to know that there's a legacy.
Yeah. It's very
That
satisfying, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, and and when I hear a few measures that I wrote here and there, and I go, oh wow, I did that, yeah,
Yeah.
and I know you did that too, and it's a a great thing, and Anything Goes was a fantastic production that lasted a long time and your production was revived several times, wasn't it?
It was, yes. In fact, it went to the into the West End from the National Theatre. Did a very successful run there, and then there was talk of it coming to New York via Washington, and for some reason it didn't happen. It's probably money, but it's a shame because I think in fact you can look at the title song, and you can look at Blow Gabriel Blow on YouTube, National Theatre, and you can see, I think, almost the entire numbers. You can see how, but it was then I learned that how to, because after all, the cardinal rule, isn't it, is that you have to pay homage to the tune. You can't start writing original material. Everything has to come from the tune. So you could say it's a set of variations in a way, but it's customized music. It has to fit the choreography like a suit. What's interesting is the different approach that choreographers take. When I worked for Ron Field, for example, this is again early 80s, the Royal Shakespeare Company did a production of Kiss Me Kate, and Ron Field was the choreographer, and he wanted a dance arranger. And Ron, I think, was quite ill then. I think this is the advent of
Yes.
HIV/AIDS and so on. And but nonetheless, he at that time seemed to be pretty hale and well. And I loved his company. And I remember him looking over the piano. He said, "You know what I like about you? You play with all 10 fingers." I never forget that. And he said, "Now, Too Damn Hot." And he came up with this fantastic uh, opening of Act Two, Too Damn Hot. And I love putting the music together for this man because he was so he was so wonderfully encouraging. But here's the thing: now we went into the orchestra calls, and I was Ian McPherson had orchestrated the stuff, and the band came to play Too Damn Hot, and all of a sudden there were new keys and there was stuff that didn't sound like the stuff I'd written. And don't forget, you this would have been played to the dancers for the last 6 weeks. They were hearing
Right.
certain things which they would expect to hear. So I think uh, he got little bit creative. And when Ron Field came in to hear that arrangement, he just went crazy. Um, it was just so unpleasant, and there was a big row. And then you see, I was so young again, I couldn't understand why
What had happened? Yeah.
what had happened, had happened. And to some extent, Ron pointed the finger at me, although later he did come, put his arm around my shoulder and say, it's not you. Um, but and I think, well, what now? You see, why does that happen? Now you see, even when I do dance arrangements, I'm even thinking about the keys. What's going to sound good in a band when
Hmm.
and all those kind of things. And then now, when you think about the lineup of the band, what have you got? One of my follies, as you know, was that I would often write too many lines.
Hmm.
So I learned to write simpler. You do more with less, because otherwise you haven't got any instruments left to do.
Right.
Because I write in short scores, don't I? It's quite the stuff I write's quite detailed, isn't it?
It is.
Um,
I was thinking that when we first bonded and started working together was when I was uh, orchestrating and writing on the Olivier Awards, and you came in with I think it was I've Got Rhythm,
that's it.
and it was my job to open up the orchestration for
Mm,
the BBC Concert Orchestra,
that's it.
and and you handed it to me, and I basically took your sketch. I don't think
Mm,
I necessarily added to it, but I orchestrated your sketch, and I think I caught some of the things that might have been missed in the small orchestra at Chichester. And I remember how pleased you were because I
yeah,
got it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
got it into the orchestra, and it did sound pretty glorious with,
They're great.
you
I
know,
remember all those dancing strings over there, all
yeah.
that wonderful, which just gives it a frisson. It was so inventive.
And,
I love what
but
it
I
was
want
doing
to
with
tell you
that.
something else about Ron Field because he was influential early in my career as well. One of the very first jobs I had was as rehearsal pianist for the Bus and Truck Tour of Applause, which he had staged on Broadway. And uh, the music director was not the strong for the Bus and Truck Tour because Don Pippin, of course, was the the music director for the Broadway show. The music director for the tour was not the strongest character in the world. And at the uh, gypsy rehearsals and stuff and the cast rehearsals, I just played it right. I just played everything. And we had a former opera singer named Patrice Munsell. I don't think she meant anything in the UK, but she was very popular in the States and actually had her own television show in the 50s in New York.
Oh,
And
so she would have been a contemporary of someone like Ellen Sturber, wouldn't she?
yeah, yeah, from an earlier time,
Yeah.
from the 50s. And she was a very good singer and quite a character and very sexy. And she was doing the Bacall part, the lead, and all, Margot Channing, the Betty Davis part. And there was a jazz song in the show called Hurry Back. And it was so not her thing to be doing this jazz tune. And the conductor, it was so not his thing as well. So in rehearsals, I would just lay it down and play it so that she came off well.
Right.
And we had this big gypsy run through. I don't know if, of course, you have them. They don't necessarily call them that. That's when they invite everybody in town to a piano dress rehearsal.
Oh yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and it was just me and the drummer
Yeah.
and this conductor kind of flailing. And I, being 19 years old, decided it was time to bury this conductor. So when he got to this number, I followed him, and Patrice Mansell stopped in the middle of the gypsy run through. And Ron Field walked straight over to me at the piano and leaned over and said, "So now you decided to follow him?"
Oh, oh yeah. Oh, bless him.
and,
Bless him. Yeah.
and then, of course, I very quickly resolved it, and I learned a lesson never to do that again, and not to, you know, either show off or try to hurt anybody uh, in a musical way. But Ron Field was he was a very talented guy, and unfortunately died prematurely.
Yeah, he did.
You know, but he was a talented guy.
Yeah, I think
I'm
Kiss Me Kate there was, I think it was pretty much his last job. I remember Lauren Bacall coming to the opening night. She was
Yeah,
his great friend, wasn't she?
yeah,
Yeah.
and he was great. He had done a lot of stock before that. He had worked with Don Pippin and John Kander
Yeah.
forever in
They
some
all came
respects.
up the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, they all did. So then you were saying that was a question of the orchestrator taking some liberties with the keys and stuff. And it's funny, uh, for instance, if I were orchestrating a piece that you had written, I probably recall calling you up and saying, I think this key is not quite right. What do you think? And you would fix it,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is the proper way to do it.
That's right. Or in fact, we had such a call one time, and you said, "Look, can I change the key?" And I said, "Of course." And you would have had a good reason for doing so. And as it happened, you didn't.
I
You
didn't
remember
change
that?
the key.
No, you
Yeah,
didn't. You just kind of made it work. And I thought, yeah, oh, yeah, of course. You said, oh, no, I
yeah,
know what to do. Do you remember that? And it
yeah.
came back, and of course, it knocked everybody out. I'll never forget, by the way, the time we did Guys and Dolls together. And the Havana sequence, apart from anything else, knocked the place for six. I have never had a sit probe like that before. Do you remember that? Everybody
I
to this
do.
day talks about that stitch probe, and particularly that long Havana sequence, which just was so inventive and so powerfully new. and interesting. Do you remember? It
I
just
remember how
sticks in my
successful
mind.
it was because but remember, since we're patting each other on the head, it's because uh, you know you gave me something to write. So I always, all of us, and I've discussed this with Doug Besterman and other orchestrators, we love it when you get a piece of music, you say, "This is going to impress everybody."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And also when I'm writing, I'm thinking, the band are going to get bored. Let's give them something interesting or that they're going to enjoy playing as well,
Yeah,
day in and day
if
out.
if the notes are right for the instrument, and you have a great orchestra, and you especially give something to the brass section, and they blow their brains out, and
Yeah.
everybody just goes crazy. But
Now,
but
I'm going to jump in
yeah,
now, Larry, because whereas Stephen Mear and I would, before a production, in the pre-production work, sit together, Alistair, David, or whichever choreographer, sit together round the piano and go number by number. How do we want to approach it? And I love doing that because it's you bounce off each other and you suggest things which perhaps wouldn't occur to them and vice versa and all that. Well, when we did that Havana Dice and Dolls, they had decided, wouldn't it be a great idea if we got a choreographer, an actual Cuban, to put together the Havana sequence? And who's the most famous Cuban choreographer dancer that anybody could think of? Carlos Acosta.
hmm
And Carlos Acosta had never done a musical before, but nonetheless decided, yeah, he would love this opportunity. Now, you're going to love this because uh, he turned up for some pre-production work with the producers and myself, and he opened his bag, and out of the bag he put on the table 5 CDs, and the CDs were all Cuban music, well, mostly salsa. And he said, "I do this," and then
yeah,
he played me some salsa, which in any case is not it's not Cuban, it's American. Salsa was invented and nurtured in New York. It's nothing to do with Cuba, although it has Cuban influences. And so he played this stuff and he said, "I do this." And then I said, "But we can't do this, Carlos." He said, "Why? You're telling me I've choreographed all this for nothing?" I said, "No, Carlos, we can't do this. For one thing, it's nothing to do with guys and dolls. Sure, I can take a salsa um, idea and but I have to always use the tunes, the melodies in the show. I can't just go off carte blanche. It has to keep nodding to the composers and the style, 1950s America." He couldn't understand this at all. And it was only when the producers waded in quite heavily, he began to understand you just can't do that. He literally, I think, was wanting us to transcribe this stuff, which was recorded in the 80s, this salsa, and simply interpolate it, into, into the
I
Havana
know
sequence.
it's
I mean,
I've I've run into that, not with salt, but other things. So they said, I want this arrangement, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I said, somebody did it already, uh,
yeah.
but
And I wish that choreographers, particularly British ones, would learn to understand that make something your own. They always want to lift something which exists. They bring the recordings and say, "I'd like to do this bit like this recording, and I'd like to lift this from this recording." Well, now when the great choreographers like Fosse and Ryan King, and I mean, did you think that for one moment they turned up with recordings of other people's stuff? No, they had they had empty manuscript paper and a guy sitting at the piano who knew his stuff, who could run with ideas in the same way that the choreographer would. And then at the end, you'd have, you know, what was the name? Rittman.
Trudy Rittman, Trudy
Trudy
Rittman.
Rittman, for example. She would have just had, and this, she was very interesting, by the way, because she was a Jewish emigre, wasn't she, from St. Petersburg, I think. She actually went to the St. Petersburg Academy. Very interesting. Proper musician. Um, I digress. But, this is the thing. The rule is once the song is started, Now you want to tell a story and dance. Now you can go anywhere you like. Why do you want to now harness yourself into someone else's ideas? Don't understand
Well,
this at all.
well, some of the great dancers like Trudy, who I think she did go to St. Petersburg, but she was German born. Um,
Oh, I didn't
and
know that.
there was also Genevieve Pitot, who everybody thought was French born, but she was actually from New Orleans. But she studied with Nadia Boulanger in
Yes.
Paris.
Yeah.
And, and John Morris, of course, was a great
Yeah.
dance arranger, and
Yeah.
Kander, and all these people were you know, really terrific. But I have to tell you this, it was so funny. During White Christmas, Tommy Walsh was the original choreographer. Randy Skinner did it when it finally came to Broadway. Uh, but Tommy did it at the Muni, and the dance arranger was Bruce Pomahack.
Oh
And
yeah. Yeah.
we were doing "I Love a Piano," and uh, I was sitting in the room because I was going to orchestrate it very quickly for the Muni. And Tommy turns to Bruce Pomahack and says, "Bruce, give me a homosexual vamp." And Bruce immediately took what was a musical vamp that they used in Seesaw, dum bum 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 bum
Oh
bum bum
yes.
bum bum,
Yeah.
and everybody was roaring with laughter, and that's the music that remained even after Tommy left
Love
the
that.
show
I
and
love
Randy did it, and Bruce couldn't stop laughing, you know. Uh, and of course Tommy was a lovely guy. I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
worked with him.
No, but
Uh,
I've never heard anything but sunny stories about him. He sounds great fun. Yeah.
yeah, he was delightful. Uh, well, moving on from there, and now that we've done the mutual admiration society, uh, after Guys and Dolls, and there were so many productions of Guys and Dolls. There's a production now running in the West End that Charlie Rosen orchestrated brilliantly, and there was the production that Michael Grandage did, which Doug Bestman orchestrated, and I was his helper on that one. And then the one we did, which they were all very successful productions because
Mm.
it's one of the great shows of all time.
Mm.
And I know that Cameron McIntosh has done a lot of revivals and changed a lot of the orchestrations and dance music. He did quite a bit on My Fair Lady, which was a
Mm.
successful production.
Yeah.
Uh, and Oliver, of course, he brought the show back to life after.
Yeah.
We have to say it was a really good show to begin with. So
Yeah.
to resurrect a hit show is a lot easier
Yeah.
than resurrecting a flop show.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, there's only so far you can go. If you think about Oliver, the thing is about Lionel Bart is he had the common touch, so that
yes.
the melodies were kind of a notch up from Noel Gay,
Mm-hmm.
um, of Me and My Girl fame, and the thing is that they can only take so much arranging before the thing breaks, if you know what I mean. Because if you get too ornate with them and too florid and too inventive, do you know what I mean by saying that you can over
Yeah.
arrange something? And the
Well,
simplicity of the thing is what really makes them work. And I found a little
well,
bit with Oliver that there were moments of Shostakovich and all this kind of thing. And so it sounded like really first class movie music. And then you go into I'll do anything.
mhm.
And sometimes it sounded incongruous. And that's what I found.
What's very interesting. One time on a Jerry Herman project, in the overture, I thought I was being very clever, and I played three tunes at once. And Jerry looked at me and says, "I know you think you're very clever, but you just shown that I've written the same tune three
Yeah,
times."
I think that's what we call over here pissing in the wind.
Yes, yes. So he said, "Take two of them out and leave the tune I wrote." Um,
I love that. Yeah, good.
but he was very very you know charming about such things.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, tell me, uh, since it's right here and it's our little private podcast, what composers aside I've always said my favorite composer was Irving Berlin because he died 20 years before I met him. Uh, so I never. But who is your favorite composers to work with?
Oh, to work with. Well, I think one of them has to be John Kander. If you think about the American composers I've worked with, it will have been, oh, sorry, John Kander, Stephen Sondheim, Stephen Schwartz, and oh God, I've gone blank. The composer, for God's sake, oh, Maury Edson. How could I forget that
Yeah.
name? And I found them all to be very accommodating.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I mean, again, when I did The Baker's Wife, I was one of my very first jobs, and we actually did the cast album too, and that's when I first met Stephen Schwartz, who then asked me to do Wicked when I came into town. But I just found they're very liberal, all of them, with their music. I mean, maybe Stephen Sondheim less so, but nonetheless, they were very easy to work with and funny and giving and
Yes.
interesting. Um, uh, I've worked with Andrew Lloyd Webber here. This is in terms of English musicians, and I've worked with Lionel Bart. My God, that was again early. I did Oliver, and he was still around, not for very much longer.
Yes.
And I'll never forget because that prized possession of his, the crown jewels, Oliver, was sold to a British entertainer called Max Bygraves, Jewish,
Oh, I
British
didn't know that
entertainer.
Max Max
Yeah,
owned that. Yeah.
yeah. He bought
Yeah.
it from Lionel Bart, who was hard up. As Lionel said to me, I don't remember much about the '60s, but I know I was there. And he bought it, and then so Lionel didn't make a penny from that. So by the time that we came to do Oliver, and it was the very first production that Cameron ever did, which he took to Toronto eventually. Ed Mervish put it into his theatre in Toronto. Um, uh, I've lost my track. What
No, no,
am I
you're saying,
talking
saying
about?
about you're about talking about Max
No, that's
Bygrave
right. That's
selling.
right. Yeah. No, I remember. Again, I was very young, but I remember, um, Lionel coming into rehearsals in Birmingham and asking Cameron for money because he had no money. And I remember Cameron reaching into his wallet and giving him 50 quid because he was broke, completely broke. And there we were, putting on what was to be a West End production of Oliver. First, it went on tour, Toronto, and then the West End. Um, I mean, incredible, really.
Didn't Cameron finally take care of Lionel though,
I
and
think he, I think he did. Yeah, he made it right. To
made it
his
right?
credit,
Because
to his credit.
I didn't realize that it was Max Bygraves who bought the rights. You
Yeah.
know, because of my extensive traveling back and forth to the UK, I had met all these people. And I did a couple of uh, concerts with Lionel, with Georgia Brown,
Wow. Yeah, Georgia. Yeah.
who was a good friend. Georgia lived in Los Angeles, and I used to work with her
Well,
quite a
she did. She played Dorothy Brock in the production of 42nd Street. I talked about. Yeah.
bit. And she was a good friend. And Max Bygraves was in one of the many Barry Mission
That's right.
shows that I ended up conducting
Yeah,
in
no,
the
he was
West
a
End.
big deal. He had his own TV show. He was Palladium on
Yeah,
Sunday night, all that stuff. Yeah, he was.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I didn't realize that. Matter of fact, there's a YouTube clip floating around right now of a, a an arts performance of Do Re Mi, the Julie Stein
my
show,
God.
which he did. Royal Variety is a good clip of it that's
Yeah,
on, and it's so fascinating to me about. I remember working with Lionel Bart because he mumbled and I didn't understand anything he was saying. You
yeah,
know, because he was talking like this all the time. But he was a lovely man, and of course he
yeah.
was dear friends with Georgia, who I knew very well.
And he was a
So
Cockney anyway,
yeah,
he in it. Um,
from Hackney and that area, yeah,
just thinking about.
Whitechapel, yeah.
Wait, that's right. Just thinking about that, and then thinking about a commission which came completely out of the blue from English National Opera. And what they wanted to do is Derek Dean was the artistic director. And Derek had started in show business, but then joined the Royal Ballet and became a big cheese. And then was invited to run the English National Ballet and is now running, I think, Shanghai Ballet. Um, and my then agent said, "There's a commission. They want you to write a ballet with him called Strictly Gershwin." So I thought it was off the back of Strictly Come Dancing. I think that was the idea, and it
Yeah,
would be a multidiscipline dance show using English National Ballet dancers and using ballroom dancers and tap dancers and the whole, and jazz dancers and the whole shebang. And that was a lovely commission. Now, whereas Anthony Van Laast, who I just wrote the dance arrangements for Kiss Me Kate, which is now playing in the West End, works in a very detailed way. Again, old school. I think it's a double-edged sword the way he works. Plus, we can talk about that. But Derek simply said, "I want to do a 4-minute production number based on this tune. I got rhythm, say, or fascinating rhythm, or whatever. And I want this to be the mood. It should be this long. There should be an adage in the middle, and then it should have a dramatic ending or something like that." So the instructions he gave were very, very, broad. Well, of course, and he said, I want there to be 4 singers, and Barbara Cook was going to be our star singer, and she would sing stuff. And then they asked Barbara whether she would mind if at some time she was singing, there was dancing going on, and she agreed. So that was a wonderful opportunity, and I because of Porgy and Bess, I invited who orchestrated Trevor Nunn's production of Porgy and Bess, yeah, which we did at the Savoy. I asked Don if he would orchestrate it, and it was for
Don
the full,
Sebesky. Yeah,
full
yeah.
Don Tedeschi for the full symphony orchestra, and I loved doing that because again I had a free hand. You know,
That's
now when,
wonderful.
yeah, when I think of the old choreographers like Lindsay Dolan, Lindsay would say, "Okay, I want to use this tune," and the first 8 goes like this: one, kick, turn, turn, hit, and then a flurry for 6, 7, and 8. And then the second 8 would be kick, hit, lift. Well, if you're doing that on every beat, you get something. You're not writing music because music is linear. So what you end up having is something which doesn't go anywhere. It's just a series of sound effects. So you have something like the sounds of Tom and Jerry music.
It's
Now
a
you must
dog
have come
act.
across,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. You must have come across that.
I did.
Um,
The first
yeah.
choreographer I worked with in the West End was Irving Davis,
Oh, yeah,
who
yeah.
was a very lovely man, and he was just play me something. He wasn't fussy at all, and you made me think of another choreographer who I really loved named Marvin Gordon, who was a dancer on Broadway and did a lot of summer stock, not too much Broadway, and sadly also died prematurely. But he was a wonderful man, and we were doing a production of Guys and Dolls,
Oh, yeah.
and I was very young, and it was the opening number, the Runyon Land opening number,
Yes.
and of course it was going to be a smaller thing. So he said, "Stop." He said, "I need 16 bars of peppy music. I need 4 bars of zoot suit music. I need 16 bars of jazz and this." He said, "Go to the score and pick the best parts."
Oh, that's interesting.
And we cut and paste because it was not a production where we were writing new music. So we
Yeah.
would take 4 bars here, 16 bars there, and just glue it all together.
Mm,
Uh, but it was a good lesson because it took care of what he needed to do on that
mm.
kind of thing. He didn't care about any accents because it was all style and people dancing
Yeah.
around the
Yeah.
stage, And we had uh, Julie Newmar playing Adelaide. Do you know who she is? Is she
Oh
familiar
yeah.
to? Yeah, and she was very, very tall. So and the guy we had playing Nathan Detroit was very short. It was a funny
I love
production.
that. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So these are great experiences to have shared. Let me ask you another couple loaded questions before we wrap it up, because we could talk
Mm,
forever, of course.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, did and you don't have to name names. Did you ever run into a situation where somebody was so impossible that you were just busy navigating their impossibleness?
I see. Yeah, I see what you mean. Um, yes. And again, it was dance arranging for somebody who didn't, who, well, first of all, had not done their homework and who would come to the piano and I'd say, okay, what do you want this to be? And they go, well, what ideas do you have? So I'd say, well, the ideas I have would all come from the lyric. So, I mean, that's the master key, isn't it? From the lyric. So
Yeah,
the lyric, they're talking about this, and therefore, wouldn't it be good if we did this? And then I demonstrate something, and then they didn't like it and didn't like it. Uh, there's a, no- and it just went on, and in the end, it makes something which should be pleasurable, just something that you want to run out of the room for. Another thing was Trevor Nunn asked me to do a show, huge production, and to which he had uh, a composer, lyricist, book writer who hitherto had not had any pedigree or experience in any of these disciplines, but was now going to be. Yeah, I mean, it's even something which Sondheim would have balked at. But we were going to do this musical, which was based on one of the great iconic books of all time. And I was called upon to take this composer's music and to craft it into something worth listening to. Now, the thing is that what they produced was. I remember at school doing O level music, so I'd have been about 16. And you remember they used to say, write a 16-bar tune in ABA form ending at the halfway point in the dominant and ending in the tonic key, and used to turn out dozens of these exercises. Well, that's what these songs were. It was something like 40 odd songs, songlets, as one of the uh, reviewers called them, songlets, because in a piece which was so long with so many songs, you're going to stuff 40 songs or something. They can't earn their keep. Um, they're so short. So I had to take each and every one of these songs and trying to make them something worth listening to. And it used every fiber of know-how in my body to do it. Anyway, the whole thing was a complete cropper. And I remember just thinking, oh God, why am I doing this? Um, but again, you will have in your time many times worked with composers who, for want of another word, were musically literate. That's to say, that they can't really write
right.
music, or if they do, it's in the most rudimentary form. But you've been asked to interpret this stuff or to
To
make it
make it
in some
happen.
way
Yeah,
worth listening to. I mean, you must have done that in your time many, many times, but I do find it
sure.
tiresome. And in
It
fact,
is
Irv
tiresome.
Costal used to talk about this, didn't he? Irv Costal.
Yes, he would say, I'd much prefer give me a lead sheet, a top line, and leave me alone. You know,
Yeah,
but because he said it was better than when they gave him something that was,
yeah.
not worth doing. And I was thinking there was one choreographer I worked with in the West End who I was having a meeting with to do a big production number, and we sat in a room at the BBC around the piano, and I had my hands on the piano,
Mm.
and I said, "Tell me, what would you like?" And she said to me, "I want it to be really good."
Okay, that was your
And
brief.
that was it. And I said, "Good like this?" She said, "Yeah, that's good." Anyway, I ended up having, to do it myself, and that's, and it's difficult because we want some, instructions on how to go, and I've told this before. Costa used to say he would have dance arrangers who would give him these massive chords, and he would say, "I have five brass. Pick your best five notes." Because I can't write that. I don't have the instruments for it and stuff like that. So, we know. Well, uh, Gareth, I can't thank you enough for having this session with me. We should do it again and cover the rest of our lives. Uh, but but it's always a pleasure. We always love working together. We always love gossiping, and I'm so glad we could share our gossip with my audience of the three people who listen to my podcast. But it is. It is. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.